Some betrayals don't come with a warning. They come with a scent. And sometimes it's not until you inhale the perfume of someone else on your husband that you realize your life was never yours to begin with. Millionaire husband leaves pregnant wife for mistress. She returns richer and more powerful than him. Claire stepped into the house, expecting warmth, expecting love. Instead, the moment she crossed the threshold, her world shattered. Millionaire husband leaves pregnant wife for mistress. She returns richer and more powerful than him. Claire stepped into the house, expecting warmth, expecting love. Instead, the moment she crossed the threshold, her world shattered. The air was thick with expensive perfume, one that wasn't hers. The soft glow of candlelight flickered over two figures on the couch. Nathan, the man she'd given everything to, and a woman draped over him like she belonged there. Sienna, her manicured fingers traced lazy circles on his chest. Her lips curled into a smirk. Claire's breath caught, her heart hammering as she forced herself to move forward, her voice barely a whisper. Nathan? He didn't flinch. He didn't even look surprised. Instead, he leaned back, his grip tightening around Sienna's waist as if Claire was nothing more than an inconvenience. Sienna didn't move. She only laughed, a slow, taunting sound, as she toyed with the diamond necklace around her neck. The same necklace Nathan had once given Claire on their anniversary. Her eyes locked on the necklace, and for a split second, time slowed. That gift had once meant a promise, a future. Now it was a mockery, glinting on the neck of the woman who had replaced her. Claire's throat tightened with the taste of betrayal and bitterness. The weight of betrayal crashed down, stealing the air from Claire's lungs. Her hands trembled, rage clawing its way up her throat, but Sienna only tilted her head, amusement dancing in her eyes. "You look surprised," she murmured, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Did you really think you were the only one?" Claire's chest tightened, her vision blurring as Nathan finally met her gaze. There was no shame, no guilt, just cold indifference. "You shouldn't have come back early," he said, as if she were interrupting something important. As if she were the intruder. In her own home, Claire took a shaky step forward, her voice breaking. "Nathan, what is this?" Sienna stretched like a satisfied cat, her fingers tracing Nathan's jaw before she turned to Claire with a wicked smile. "This," she echoed. "This is the truth." The words were a blade to Claire's heart, but Nathan delivered the final cut without hesitation. "I filed for divorce." His voice was emotionless, final. "Pack your things." The room spun. The walls seemed to close in, suffocating her. Divorce. Just like that, as if she meant nothing. "You don't mean that," she choked out. "Nathan, we built this life together." "You built nothing," he cut her off. "Everything you have, everything you are, is because of me." His words were ice, slicing her apart with surgical precision. And now it's over. The humiliation was unbearable. Claire felt her knees weaken, not just from the words, but from the memory of the choices she had made for him. She had given up a rising career, left behind her growing design studio, all because Nathan once said, "Let me take care of us." And she believed him. Now she had nothing, no work, no support, no identity of her own. Sienna watched, completely at ease, draped in silk and diamonds, enjoying the show. "You should be grateful, Claire," she purred. "Nathan was generous enough to let you stay this long. The cruelty was suffocating." Claire wanted to scream, to fight, but the look in Nathan's eyes told her it was useless. He had already erased her from his life. By morning, the world had turned against her. Headlines screamed accusations. Nathan Ellis's ungrateful wife finally exposed, as if she had been nothing but a burden. The media painted her as a gold digger, a bitter woman discarded for someone younger, more beautiful. Nathan and Sienna played the perfect couple. Their love story splashed across every magazine, every news channel. They laughed at high society galas, posed for photos in the same places Claire once stood. She was a ghost in her own life, wiped from existence. Then came the final blow. The house she had called home was no longer hers. Security guards stood at the entrance, their blank expressions telling her they had their orders. "You're no longer welcome here, ma'am." "Ma'am." As if she were a stranger, as if she hadn't spent years building a life behind those gates. Her fingers tightened around the crumpled eviction notice, her vision swimming. She had nothing. No money, no home, no allies. Her hand instinctively moved to her belly, cradling the soft swell that held the only piece of her future still untouched. A silent tear slipped down her cheek, not for Nathan, not for herself, but for the child who would never know what a real family could have been. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. But Nathan wasn't done. His cruelty knew no bounds. "You're unfit," his lawyer had told her, the words burning into her skull. Nathan will be filing for full custody. Full custody of a child who hadn't even been born yet. Claire's knees nearly buckled, her hands gripping the chair to steady herself. "He can't do this," she whispered. But the lawyer only smiled, cold and unbothered. "He already has." It was a death sentence. She had lost everything, her husband, her home, her name, and now he was taking her child too. The gates of the mansion boomed behind her, cold and unyielding, the final reminder of everything she had lost. Nathan and Sienna stood on the balcony above, looking down at her like she was nothing more than an inconvenience, like she was already forgotten. But Claire didn't cry, she didn't beg, she didn't scream. Instead, she inhaled deeply, her spine straightening as she turned away. Let them gloat. Let them believe they had won, because one day she would return. And when she did, Nathan would beg for mercy. Claire clutched the eviction notice, her hands trembling. As the reality settled in, she had nowhere to go. The world she once ruled had discarded her overnight, and the man she sacrificed everything for had thrown her away like she was nothing. Every call for help was met with silence. The so-called friends who once fawned over her at lavish galas now ignored her as if she had never existed. The media had already decided her fate, painting her as the bitter ex-wife, a woman who couldn't keep a millionaire husband satisfied. Sleep had become a luxury she could no longer afford. For weeks, Claire lay awake night after night, staring at ceilings in unfamiliar motels or curled on benches in silence, her thoughts looping through betrayal, survival, and fear. Her body ached, her mind spun, and every sunrise felt like another cruel reminder that she was alone in a world that had moved on without her. She sat on the cold pavement, staring at the towering skyline, wondering how quickly life had unraveled. Then the phone rang, a voice from the past. Miranda, the woman who once admired Claire's talent, now offering a lifeline. "Meet me tomorrow. I have a proposal." The words felt like oxygen in a suffocating world. But Claire knew Miranda never did anything out of kindness. There would be a price. But when you've lost everything, even the devil seems like a savior. With nowhere else to turn, she wiped her tears, steadied her breath, and made a silent vow. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning of something new. Miranda's office was a kingdom built on ruthless ambition, and as Claire stepped inside, she felt the weight of the unspoken deal pressing against her chest. The older woman leaned back, eyes sharp with calculation. "You have nothing, Claire. No money, no power, no home. But you do have one thing, desperation. And that makes you dangerous." Claire met her gaze, refusing to shrink under the pressure. "I don't want charity. If you called me here, you need something." There was a flicker of hesitation in Claire's chest. Not from fear, but from the knowledge that she was standing on a cliff's edge, about to jump into something far darker than she'd ever known. She had already lost her name, her future, and her child's safety. What was left to protect but the fight itself? Miranda smirked, amused by the fire that hadn't burned out. "Nathan is crumbling. He doesn't know it yet, but his empire is hanging by a thread. I can help you rise, but in return, I want one thing: revenge." The offer was laced with poison, but Claire was no stranger to venom. If Miranda had the resources to pull Nathan down, she wouldn't do it herself. She wanted Claire to be the weapon. "I don't trust you," Claire admitted. But Miranda only chuckled. "You don't have to. Just trust that we both want the same thing: his downfall." Claire didn't hesitate. She extended her hand, sealing a deal with a woman just as dangerous as the man she wanted to destroy. Claire spent nights digging, connecting pieces of a puzzle Nathan never wanted the world to see. His empire, built on illusions of power, was rotting from the inside. Investors whispered about missing funds. Key executives resigned without explanation. And at the center of it all, Sienna, the woman who took everything from her. Sienna wasn't Nathan's salvation. She was his curse. She had access to his fortune, his secrets, his vulnerabilities, and she was using them. Claire smiled bitterly. He had traded a wife who built him up for a mistress who would tear him down. She sent Miranda a single message: "He's weaker than we thought." The reply came instantly: "Then we hit where it hurts." Claire stared at her reflection in the screen. Nathan had underestimated her. That was his first mistake. Thinking she would stay broken, that would be his last. Nathan believed power made him untouchable, but power had a weakness. It made men reckless. He thought he had buried Claire, erased her existence, but he never realized what she had learned by standing at his side. She knew his fears, his insecurities, the cracks in his armor, and more than anything, she knew his arrogance. He underestimated people who had nothing left to lose. He never saw them coming. That was his mistake. Claire started small, whispers in elite circles, a hint of doubt planted in the right minds. Nathan was losing control, and people were watching. His company thrived on image, on the illusion of stability. But an illusion only needed one sharp strike to shatter. And Claire was ready to swing the hammer. When Nathan stripped Claire of everything, he thought he had buried her. But all he did was set the stage for her rebirth. She had spent years designing, creating, building something of her own. He had laughed at her dreams, dismissing them as a hobby. Now that hobby was about to become the very thing that destroyed him. With Miranda's resources, Claire launched her fashion brand, an empire built on the ashes of her past. And the world noticed. The same elites who had once turned their backs on her suddenly leaned in, intrigued by the woman who refused to stay defeated. Sienna may have worn diamonds, but Claire, she was crafting legacies. She watched as orders poured in, as high society. Women whispered her name again, not as Nathan's ex-wife, but as the woman reshaping luxury itself. And for the first time since losing everything, Claire felt something stir inside her. Power. The opportunity came faster than she expected. A high-stakes business deal that could decide the future of Nathan's empire. He needed it. Without it, everything would collapse. Claire walked into the boardroom like she belonged there, because she did. She had built this world with him, and now she was taking it back. The moment Nathan saw her, his confidence faltered. For the first time, she met his gaze, unwavering. But just before she opened her mouth, a flash of hesitation fluttered through her chest. Her palms were slick, her breath caught in her throat. What if this backfired? What if she wasn't ready? Just weeks ago, she had stood in another boardroom, heard the door close behind her, and left empty-handed. That moment had haunted her every night since. This could be another fall, or the moment everything changed. The doubts tried to claw through, but she forced them down hard. She had come too far to crumble now. "I believe this deal belongs to me now." Silence, then disbelief. He laughed, dismissive. "You can't afford this." Miranda's voice cut through like a blade, and she just did. The contract was signed before Nathan could react. He had walked in thinking he would win. He walked out knowing he had lost. Claire? She walked out knowing this was just the beginning. Sienna had spent years playing her role, basking in luxury, certain she had won. But watching Nathan lose to Claire planted a seed of doubt. He wasn't invincible, wasn't untouchable. And worse, he was slipping. Claire was rising from the ashes, and Nathan, he was barely holding on. For the first time, Sienna wondered if she had backed the wrong millionaire. Just as Claire began to taste victory, the world reminded her of one brutal truth: Nathan never played fair. She received the notice late at night, legal documents, a lawsuit. He wasn't just trying to destroy her business, he was coming for her child. The claim was ruthless: unfit mother, unstable, incapable. He was trying to take full custody before their baby was even born. Claire's hands clenched around the papers, her heart pounding. You wanted war? Then war it was. Nathan's eyes were cold, calculating, as he filed the papers, accusing Claire of being an unfit mother. He had prepared for this moment for months. With his wealth and influence, he twisted the court system in his favor, turning everything against her. Every lie he told was another stake in her heart, another strike in the battle he forced her into. Claire sat in her lawyer's office, staring at the papers. Her hands shook, but her face remained calm. She had no choice but to fight. Nathan was using everything, her past, her emotions, her relationship with their unborn child, as weapons to strip her of the one thing she held dear. The fight was no longer just about revenge. It was about survival. She had to hold on to what she loved most, even if it meant burning her own soul in the process. Every accusation was a lie. every twist part of his plan to destroy her. But Claire wasn't backing down. She wasn't going to let him win. Not this time. Sienna had always been Nathan's right hand, the woman he trusted when everyone else doubted him. But she had her own plans, behind closed doors. She had been siphoning money from Nathan's accounts, preparing for her escape the moment his empire crumbled. She wasn't going to go down with the ship. She had waited long enough, using Nathan's wealth to fuel her own dreams. The truth came crashing in when a trusted informant reached out to Claire. "Sienna's been stealing from him," the voice whispered over the phone, "and she's planning to leave, once everything falls apart." The betrayal cut deep, sharper than Claire had expected. Sienna, the woman who had once been her rival, was now the very person ensuring Nathan lost everything. It was like a dagger to her heart. But Claire couldn't afford to be emotional now. Sienna had just added another layer of deception to a world already drowning in lies. Claire wasn't going to let her get away with this. Sienna was just another piece in the puzzle that would bring Nathan to his knees. Claire's heart stopped when she uncovered the truth. Nathan had never loved her. Their marriage was never about love or commitment. It was a business transaction. A calculated move to secure his position before the company went public, all those years ago. All those promises had been lies. The honeymoon was just a show. The affection, part of a well-crafted plan. Nathan had married her for the image, for the story. He needed a wife to complete the picture of the perfect millionaire, the man who had everything. But the moment his company went public, everything changed. Claire was nothing more than a pawn in his game, a tool for the public eye. The realization hit her like a freight train. All her love, all her sacrifices had been nothing more than a way for him to play the game. She had been blinded by her own emotions, believing in a lie that Nathan had so carefully crafted. But now the mask was off. The truth was undeniable. Claire had never truly meant anything to him. She was just a part of his plan to rise higher, to secure his legacy. She wasn't his partner. She was his stepping stone. Claire was done playing nice. She had been pushed into a corner, forced to fight for her son, and now she had nothing left to lose. Nathan had tried to break her, tried to use their son as a weapon, but Claire wasn't backing down. She had fought for every inch of this life, and she wasn't going to let him take it all away. Now, in the courtroom, her voice was steady, but her eyes were fierce. "You want war, Nathan?" she said, her words dripping with venom. "You've got it." This wasn't just about money or revenge. This was about her son, her family, and her dignity. She would burn down everything Nathan had built if it meant protecting what was hers. The weight of the battle pressed down on her, but Claire refused to show weakness. Every accusation Nathan threw at her only made her more determined to win. She wasn't going to let him tear apart everything she had fought for. She would fight with everything she had, even if it meant destroying him in the process. The world had always seen Nathan as untouchable, a billionaire whose empire seemed to grow every day. But the cracks were starting to show. The rumors, the investigations, the whispers in the boardrooms, they were all catching up with him. Claire, she had the one thing that could destroy him. She had proof. Proof of his lies, of his manipulation, of his crimes. Nathan had underestimated her, thought he could control her, but now he was trapped. Claire held the cards, and she was going to play them at the right moment. She knew the public would tear him apart when the truth came out. They would see him for the fraud he truly was. And with his empire crumbling, so would his power. Claire watched as Nathan's world slowly fell apart. As his investors pulled out, his reputation soured, and his own people turned on him. The empire he had worked so hard to build was collapsing under its own weight. There had been nights, quiet, suffocating nights, when Claire almost gave up. When the fight felt endless and the world felt deaf to her pain. She would sit in silence, staring at the ceiling, tears pooling in her ears, wondering if it was worth it. But then she would feel a gentle kick from within, a reminder of who she was truly fighting for. That tiny heartbeat had become her reason to rise each morning, to keep breathing, to keep fighting. Claire was right there, waiting for the perfect moment to bring it all crashing down. Claire walked into the room like a storm. Every eye was on her. Every whisper died in an instant. She could feel the tension shift. Where once she had been pitied, Now she was feared. And she didn't flinch. Every step forward was a reckoning. Her heels echoed like a countdown. This wasn't just a business confrontation. It was justice in tailored heels. The air was thick with the scent of luxury, the taste of power. She wasn't just some woman scorned anymore. She was the executioner. Nathan stood at the head of the room, confident, a man in control, with his usual air of untouchable arrogance. But Claire could see it now, the cracks in his empire. It was all a lie, and she was here to expose it. With every step, she felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. But there was no turning back now. She was done playing the part of the neglected wife. Now she would be the one to watch his empire crumble. His empire wasn't the fortress he thought it was, and she was the wrecking ball. She didn't waste a moment. She started by exposing the lies, one by one. Nathan's promises, the facade of wealth, the illusion of control, none of it was real. His so-called investments were nothing but sinking ships, his businesses teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. For years he had hidden behind a wall of fake numbers, manipulating the media, the investors, everyone. But Claire had done her homework, and now she was the one holding the truth. As she laid it bare, the room grew colder. Gasps filled the air. The whispers turned into shocked silence. Nathan's hands trembled as he tried to regain control. But Claire's words were like knives, slicing through his lies, exposing everything he had built as a hollow shell. His empire wasn't built on strength, it was built on deception. And now everyone could see it, but it didn't stop there. No, Claire wasn't finished. She turned her gaze toward Sienna, the woman who had once been Nathan's star. Sienna, who had basked in the luxury, in the attention, in the gifts. The woman who had made sure to stay close to Nathan as long as he was the golden boy. But now, Claire had the proof, and it hit like a bombshell. Sienna had been siphoning money from Nathan's accounts, setting up her own escape plan before his empire came crashing down. Sienna wasn't a mistress, she was a traitor. And in that instant, Claire didn't feel vindicated, she felt liberated. The betrayal had been a scar that once bled in silence, and now the entire room bore witness to it. She wasn't just airing out Nathan's sins, she was freeing herself from them. And now she was exposed, for the world to see. The room went dead silent again. The investors shifted uncomfortably, some looking at each other, unsure of what to believe. But there was no denying it now. Sienna, the woman who had once been untouchable, was as much a part of Nathan's downfall as anyone. As the truth about Sienna came out, the investors turned. They had been loyal to Nathan as long as he was a symbol of success. But now, that illusion was shattered. The money that had once flowed freely into his accounts now turned cold. The investors, one by one, started to pull away, their faces hardening. They'd been fooled, and they weren't about to stand by while their money evaporated. The room erupted into chaos. Voices rose, accusations flew, and Nathan's once glowing reputation fell apart. The empire he had built was crumbling right before his eyes, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Claire stood tall in the center of it all, a force of nature. As she watched him fall, she was the one who had brought it all down, piece by piece. The final blow came when Claire dropped the custody bombshell. It wasn't just his empire that she had taken. She had taken the one thing Nathan held most precious, his child. He staggered backward, his face drained of color. The one thing money couldn't buy back. His child was gone. Claire had fought for this moment. She had fought for her rights, for her family, and now Nathan was left with nothing. All the wealth in the world couldn't bring his child back. All the power he had accumulated couldn't fix the mess he had made. Claire had taken everything from him, and he couldn't stop her. Nathan's desperation was palpable. He reached for Claire, begging, pleading with her to reconsider. But Claire wasn't moved. She had watched him destroy her, her family, and now he was paying the price. She simply watched as he sank deeper into his own mess. There was no sympathy in her eyes, only cold satisfaction. This was the reckoning he had earned, and Claire wasn't going to let him escape. She had been broken by him. But now, it was his turn to feel the weight of his own actions. She stood there, unmoving, as his empire fell to pieces around him. Sienna, seeing the disaster unfold, made her move. The sinking ship was no longer worth staying on. She walked away without a second thought, abandoning Nathan like a piece of trash. There was no loyalty in her. There had never been. She had used him for his money, and now that the well was running dry, she didn't hesitate to save herself. As she walked out the door, she didn't even glance back. Her betrayal had been the final piece of Nathan's destruction, and she didn't care. She didn't care. She was free. Nathan, on the other hand, was left with nothing but ruins. Claire stood in the doorway, looking out at the chaos she had just caused. Nathan's empire was in tatters, his world crashing down around him, and the press was already gathering outside, eager to capture every humiliating moment. She could feel the weight of the world on her shoulders, but it didn't matter. She had won. Nathan had underestimated her. But now, the world would know the truth. She had done what she had to do, and it had cost Nathan everything. She turned her back on him, stepping out of the room and into the chaos that awaited. The press would have their story, but it wouldn't be the one Nathan had wanted. He had lost it all, and there was no coming back from this. Claire walked away, leaving him to drown in the wreckage he had created. The world would watch as his empire crumbled, piece by piece, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Claire's heels clicked sharply as she entered the building that had once been the heart of Nathan's empire. She was no longer the broken woman who had been cast aside, humiliated, and left to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. No, this time, she was the one walking through those doors, as the woman who had rebuilt herself from the ground up. The world had watched as Nathan's empire crumbled. And in the midst of that chaos, Claire had risen. She wasn't the poor, desperate woman anymore. She was a force to be reckoned with. Her empire, her success, were no longer just dreams, but a reality. As she walked through the doors, she knew this was more than just a building. This was the symbol of everything she had worked for, everything she had lost, and everything she had taken back. She paused for a moment, eyes scanning the lobby that had once felt like enemy territory. Now it bowed to her presence. She glanced down at the small hand wrapped around her finger, her child, her strength. In that one touch was every tear she'd cried, every night she'd fought to survive. This wasn't just victory. It was redemption. Yet even now, in her quietest moments, sleep didn't always come easy. There were still nights when the past clawed its way into her dreams. Nathan's words, the courtroom tension, the sound of doors slamming behind her. She would jolt awake in the dark, heart racing, reaching for a child that reminded her it was all behind her, that she had made it, that she had won. Her eyes glanced around the place that once held her humiliation, now held her power. She wasn't here to beg. She wasn't here to plead. This was her moment of triumph. Claire was no longer the one seeking approval. She was the one who had the power to give it. The woman who had once been scorned now held the world in her hands, and no one could take it from her. Nathan sat in the remnants of his once grand office, the walls now bare and cold, as if the very air had turned against him. His empire, once a towering giant of wealth and influence, lay in ruins. The whispers of his downfall were everywhere, on the lips of former allies, in the media, and in the cold eyes of those who had once worshipped him. He had been the king of the world, untouchable, his name synonymous with power. Now he was a ghost, haunting the same halls that had once been filled with praise and respect. He couldn't escape the bitter irony. He had spent his life building an empire, only to watch it collapse piece by piece. The very foundation he had stood upon had crumbled, and he was left with nothing. His former employees who had once kissed his feet now avoided his gaze. The wealth, the fame, the luxury, gone. All he had now were the ghosts of the people who had once adored him, now mocking him from every corner. His phone had stopped ringing. His emails were ignored. There was no one left to call him a friend, no one to remind him of the power he once wielded. Nathan was no longer a king. He was a man lost in the ruins of his own making. Nathan's hand trembled as he held the last vestiges of his power, the final scraps of the fortune that once defined him. The bank accounts were empty. His investments had turned to dust, and the companies he once controlled were being sold off one by one. He was a millionaire in name only, a man whose wealth had evaporated like smoke in the wind. The world had moved on, leaving him in the dust. His name no longer commanded respect. It only invited pity. The people who had once bowed to him now saw him as nothing more than a cautionary tale. There was no more admiration, no more envy. just the bitter taste of failure. His dreams of rebuilding his empire seemed laughable now. How could he possibly go back to the way things were when everything he had worked for was gone? His money was gone. His influence was gone. And with it, his identity. He was a millionaire only in title, but in reality, he was nothing. His lavish lifestyle was nothing more than a distant memory, a reminder of the man he had once been. Now, the only thing left was the hollow echo of his past, and the realization that he was no longer the man he had once been. Nathan's former friends had become strangers overnight. The once tight-knit group that had celebrated his every victory now acted as if they had never known him. They had moved on just as quickly as they had once praised him. It became painfully clear that loyalty had always been bought with money. And now that the money was gone, so was their loyalty. They wouldn't return his calls. They wouldn't return his messages. They had vanished as if they had never been a part of his life. The lavish dinners, the expensive trips, the promises of lifelong friendship, none of it had been real. Nathan had once been surrounded by people who claimed to care about him, but now he saw the truth. His friendships had always been transactions. They had been there as long as he had something to offer. But now that he had nothing, they were gone. It wasn't just his wealth that had disappeared. It was his entire world. The people he had trusted, the people he had thought were his friends, had vanished without a trace. They weren't his friends. They were opportunists. And now Nathan was left with nothing but the bitter realization that he had been used. Claire stood in the grand foyer of the mansion where she had once begged for Nathan's forgiveness. The same mansion where she had been cast aside, discarded as if she were nothing. The marble floors, the sweeping staircase, the chandeliers. It was all still here, but it no longer belonged to Nathan. It belonged to her. She had taken back what was rightfully hers. And now, the house that had been built on betrayal was hers to command. The walls, once cold and unfeeling, now seemed to embrace her, as if they recognized the woman who had once walked in their shadows. She had walked this path before, but this time everything was different. She wasn't here to plead, to beg for her place. She wasn't here to grovel at Nathan's feet. She was here to claim what was hers. The house that had once been a symbol of Nathan's power and control now stood as a monument to her victory. Every room, every corner, whispered the story of betrayal and redemption. She had been humiliated in these halls, cast out and abandoned. But now, as she stood at the top of the staircase looking down at the house that had once been her prison, she knew that she had taken back everything. This was her house now. Claire had reclaimed her life, and no one, not even Nathan, could take it from her. Claire held her child close, the small figure nestled against her chest, and in that moment she felt the weight of everything she had fought for. The child was the one thing that had kept her going through the darkest times, the one thing that mattered more than anything else. As she looked down at the innocent face, she realized just how much she had gained, but also how much she had lost. Nathan's presence in their life had been a toxic one. And now that he was out of the picture, Claire could finally breathe. She had fought for her freedom, for her child's future, and now, with every step she took, she felt the weight of that fight lift. Nathan would never be part of their lives again. And for the first time in years, Claire felt a sense of peace. She looked down at her child's face and knew that the future was bright. This child, the one who had given her the strength to keep going, would never have to grow up in the shadow of Nathan's cruelty. And as she held her child close, she knew that she had finally won. Nathan could never hurt her again. He could never hurt them again. Claire looked at Nathan one last time, her expression calm, almost serene, but her words were sharp as daggers. "You've lost everything, Nathan, and you'll never get it back. Not your empire, not your reputation, not even your family. You thought you could crush me, but you didn't realize you were the one who was crushed all along." Her voice was steady, but there was a coldness to it, a finality that echoed in the silence between them. Nathan's face twisted in anger, but there was no fury left in his eyes. The fire that once burned so brightly in him had been extinguished. He was a man defeated, and Claire's words were the final blow. She had waited for this moment, for the opportunity to make him feel the weight of his own destruction. She had seen him at his peak, watched as he took everything from her. And now, as he stood before her, a broken man, she finally had the power to take back what was hers. "You thought you could take everything from me," she continued, her voice cutting through the air. "But it's you who's left with nothing. This is your downfall, Nathan, and you'll never escape it." She turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, helpless, with nothing but the ghosts of his past. The cameras flashed as Claire walked away, each step a statement of her strength, her power. She had reclaimed her life, and there was no turning back now. The reporters were shouting, trying to get her attention, but she didn't stop. She didn't need to speak anymore. Her actions had said everything. Nathan, on the other hand, was still reeling, still trying to come to terms with the fact that he had been destroyed. His empire was gone. His friends had abandoned him. And Claire had left him in the dust. The world watched as his fall from grace played out in real time. He had thought he could break her, but it had been him who had been shattered. Claire had risen from the ashes, and there was no stopping her now. The woman he had once discarded was now the one in control. He would never be able to escape her. Not now, not ever. Claire had the last word, and she had proven that no one could ever take away her strength again. Her story wasn't over. It was just beginning. And for Nathan, the nightmare was far from finished. Dear friend, life isn't always fair. Sometimes the very people we love the most are the ones who hurt us the deepest. But as the Stoics believed, we cannot control others, but we can always control how we respond. Claire was pushed to the edge. She lost love, honor, her home, and the future she once believed in. But she didn't stay in the pain. She chose to rise. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because she knew the right thing to do was to keep going. If you've ever felt betrayed, abandoned, or completely lost, know this: you're not alone. Like Claire, you have the power to begin again. You can rewrite your story, stronger, clearer, and more courageous than before. Your pain does not define you. How you rise from it, that's who you are. If this story made you feel seen or touched your heart, go ahead and like the video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more stories like Claire's. We're walking this road together.